Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the microbiome as it relates to inflammation, autoimmunity, and pain. So the microbiome, as we know, which is the collection of microbes that live in and on us, numbering in the trillions, right? 10 to 1 cells, bacterial cells outnumbering our own, has a profound impact on the body's inflammatory processes, the development and pathogenesis of autoimmune diseases, and pain, both how it's initiated and how we receive it, and kind of this negative feedback loop we can get in um, of chronic pain disorders. So let's start with talking about inflammation. Inflammation is not a bad thing, right? It's the body's natural response to protect itself against harm. There's actually two types of inflammation, acute and chronic. Acute is the kind where you bang your knee or you cut your finger, and your immune system dispatches an army of white blood cells to surround and protect the area. This creates the redness and the swelling, and this is the same process that works if you have an infection or you contract a virus or something like that. The body is trying to protect itself. This inflammation is essential. Without it, injuries would fester, infections would become deadly, and there would be a whole lot of problems if our body wasn't trying to fight off pathogens or infections or things like that our body is susceptible to. How does the microbiome, involved with this inflammatory response? So, short-chain fatty acids, which are derived from those commensal bacteria, remember those good, friendly bacteria that we want to have in good quantities and diversities in our gut, um, they regulate this inflammatory response not only to intestinal injury, so if we have gut upset or damage to the intestinal lining, but also in models of arthritis and allergy, which we'll be talking about a little bit later as far as this, pain and inflammation goes. Really interesting research coming out about Lactobacillus plantarum, which is a highly adaptable species, and it increases butyrate, which is that short chain fatty acid, right? And butyrate is amazing, and we'll talk about it in several other research studies that I've dug up for you guys. But it also reduces inflammation, Lactobacillus plantarum, eats toxins, and basically poops out nutrients, so B vitamins and different enzymes. So a really interesting interesting strain as far as the microbiome goes, and looking at this inflammatory response and how to help inflammation with improving microbial diversity. The other kind of inflammation is kind of this less than desirable type of inflammation where the body gets stuck in this negative feedback loop. Signs and symptoms of chronic inflammation are premature aging, susceptibility to infections, acid reflux, which is one which surprises many people, cancer, which in so many ways is an inflammatory disease in a way the body is not appropriately processing cell death, skin conditions, arthritis, which we'll talk about inflammation and pain, right? High blood pressure, which is really interesting. So chronic inflammation can recur in response to other unwanted substances in the body. So that's why cigarette smoke or excess abdominal fat is linked to like coronary heart disease and atherosclerosis, because this inflammation that's triggered by that cigarette smoke or the belly fat, this inflammation from that excess adipose tissue, leads to inflammation of the arteries causing heart disease. What's some other ones? Oh, yeah, so urinary tract infections, especially ones that are persistent and keep coming back. We're looking at a significant imbalance of the inflammatory process when the body isn't working appropriately. The tricky part is understanding what the cause of the inflammation is. So, like I said, underlying bacterial infections, viral or even fungal, that are in the bloodstream or the organs, especially the stomach and the GI tract, can be perpetuators of this chronic inflammatory response. The body ecology diet had some different ideas on potential sources of chronic low-grade inflammation, such as food allergies or sensitivities that maybe aren't even causing symptoms, but are creating an inflammatory response in the body, as the body is not liking those foods, not enough to cause, anaphylaxis, but enough to create an inflammatory response. What about an imbalance of bacteria, right, in the GI tract, which is kind of what we're talking about in this whole lecture series? This dysbiosis that causes your immune system to overreact to bacteria in your gut because it's not in right proportions, it's not in this commensal stage, and so we start having notable symptoms. Stress is a huge one. Constant psychological, emotional, or physical stress actually raises your cortisol, right? And cortisol creates inflammation. Environmental toxicity is huge from water, air, food, and toxic metals. Many people have genetic predispositions to have bad detoxification, like their body is not great at getting out these different heavy, whether it's metals or, you know, BPA from the plastics or things like that. And so it circulates in the body, deposits in areas that shouldn't be, and causes inflammation because the body is trying to fight it off for us. Thanks for that, by the way, body. Um, Diet and lifestyle, of course. Too much sugar or even too much animal protein in your diet can cause inflammation. Constant dehydration from not getting enough water or drinking too much soda or caffeine. Inactivity, and then, of course, a lack of sleep, which really increases the inflammatory levels in your body. So, what's the connection to mitochondria, microbiome, inflammation, and pain? All right, so nutrient metabolism, which is a function that's shared by both the microbiome and the mitochondria, is basically where we're going with this. So nutrient metabolism is basically getting energy from your food to feed your cells and have your body do the right thing, both your cells and feed your bacteria, right? Um, the microbiome and the mitochondria work together, like significantly. For example, products of the microbiome, like butyrate, which we were talking about earlier, actually triggers the mitochondria to do its job. And the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell, they produce about 90% of the chemical energy that cells need to survive, and they are destroyed by chronic inflammation. So, right, no energy, no life. Mitochondrial dysfunction means no energy for the body to be functioning like it needs to be. Metabolic health and mitochondria are just synonymous. Mitochondria is our predominant substrate for oxidation. So oxidative stress we know is a bad thing, right? We need this healthy oxidative processes to occur. We need our super antioxidants and glutathione and all of those things. And because muscle is our largest and most metabolically active tissue mass, it's therefore our greatest unified site of mitochondria. So mitochondria and muscle functions are positively impacted by physical activity and diet. Because of the way our bodies outsource these functions of microbial activity, it's becoming essential to have a healthy microbiome to have healthy mitochondria. And because where this is all connected to muscle health and energy production and all of those things, it has direct correlations with inflammation and pain. So how did we get this problem? Leaky gut. So this is a topic that 10 years ago was, you know, in many circles, a little bit of a hot topic. But more and more, the research is solidifying this as a scientific principle of significant imbalance in the body, both resulting from chronic disease and triggering. So we trigger it with leaky gut, and then because of whether it's medications, lifestyle, stress, all those other things, we perpetuate the leaky gut, which then intensifies the symptoms. So leaky gut is basically, how's a good way to explain it? So when you look at your skin, that's basically the same of what's going on in your gut. The gut is not, it's basically an external system, because if you imagine a little spaceship flying in your mouth and down your stomach and through your guts and then you poop it out, right? That is technically an external system. Whereas the heart and the liver and those kind of things are inside our body, the gut is actually exposed to the outside. And so in the gut, like on the skin, we have these epithelial cells, and they need to be smushed right nice and tight close together, connected by collagen proteins, these tight junctions, so that no large antigens or proteins or anything else that's harmful, even bacteria, crosses into the body. We kind of want it in this outside system of the gut. What happens in leaky gut is, for a variety of environmental reasons, or we'll read all this big list here in a minute, that tight junction becomes larger and larger and it becomes leaky. So in between these epithelial cells, things are getting through that shouldn't. And that causes an inflammatory and immune response, which correlates to the pain, which we'll get to in a minute, because those things need not be on the inside. They need to not be in the bloodstream. And the body is going to react and say, hey, you're not welcome here, dudes. And so leaky gut is triggered by and perpetuated by, and this integrity of the gut is lessened by alcohol, stress, sugar, these food intolerances that cause inflammation because the body is always trying to deal with them, even overtraining. NSAIDs are a big one. Having an infection. So often a trigger for people is, oh, I got this nasty gut bug when we were on vacation in who knows where and ate some fish tacos. I say that because it's a story near and dear to my heart. Um, and then it triggered this, autoimmune condition or something crazy because we had this infection or bacterial problem that triggered a breakdown of healthy gut lining. Consistent NSAID use, so anti-inflammatories, even nutrient deficiencies. There are certain nutrients like glutamine and zinc that are necessary to keep the tight junctions tight, and so they can continue to have, a strong integrity, created this good barrier. Caffeine, antibiotics, of course. Um, so I love this quote: by sealing your leaky gut, you can put out the fire that feeds your inflammation, calm your immune system, and decrease your pain. So the microbiome is definitely a really important part of this whole gut imbalance, that leads to, as we say, the gut is the root of our health. But it definitely is a part, because understanding how to continue to heal the gut on top of having these, um, and then restoring the microbial diversity is really the key to unlocking your health and wellness and addressing this systemic inflammation, autoimmunity, and chronic pain. So let's talk about obesity. And I love this picture of the girl who is exhausted, right? Chronic fatigue. So many of my clients that are dealing with obesity and this weight loss resistance despite diet and exercise are just so tired. And obviously she's not obese. I'm pretty sure I couldn't fit my butt in that dryer. But the point here is to keep in mind that because metabolic health and mitochondrial health are so connected, and because mitochondrial health is dependent on activity of the microbiome, that this whole obesity, inflammation, microbiome, mitochondria connection is kind of like turning the Titanic around, which is why we look at all of these aspects to help people overcome weight loss resistance and to get to a place where they feel healthy and their body is reacting appropriately to, metabolism. So um, inflammation is a huge trigger for obesity, so much that obesity can actually be considered as a disorder of the inflammation with links to intestinal permeability and dysbiosis. Um, we always talk about obese individuals having this significantly altered microbiome, this ratio of Firmicutes to Bacteroides, just like the skinny fat mouse, uh, research study. So inflammation, these inflammatory cytokines actually inhibit insulin signaling, leading to insulin resistance and increased blood sugar. So even if diet and exercise is on point, if you've got low-grade underlying inflammation, you're destroying your insulin sensitivity and increasing blood sugar even without maybe partaking in necessarily those foods. Or if you're one of those people that looks at a cookie and gains 5 pounds, your body is not appropriately utilizing energy from the food for energy in the body. It's turning it in straight into storage, right? Which, is how you end up falling asleep in a dryer. So These pro-inflammatory cytokines also disrupt tight junctions, impairing the intestinal barrier, which then again resets the cycle for increasing inflammation. So some of the changes in the gut that trigger inflammation are overabsorption of bacterial debris. So this is when the bacteria gets from the gut into the bloodstream, which is where we don't want it to be. Nutrient malabsorption. So many parts of our body that are dependent on absorbing nutrients into our body they're just in the gut, right? We have these microvilli that are lining the gut lining so that they can help continue breaking down the nutrients to be absorbed. Healthy level of stomach acid, digestive enzymes, all of those things. So nutrients not having enough and not there not being enough nutrients in the body. And I would say the majority of my obese clients have more malabsorption and they're more malnourished on a nutrient level than those that don't have weight concerns, because the body is not getting nutrition from the food into the cell. And then, of course, intestinal permeability, which we already talked about. Okay, so how does that relate to pain? So when foreign invaders pass through a leaky gut and enter the bloodstream, they're known as antigens, which is basically just a foreign substance that induces an immune response in the body. So the body says, hey, not a dude that's supposed to be here. It's an antigen. We're going to create these antibodies to go attack and destroy this foreign invader. And that can be bacteria, viruses, undigested food, even especially proteins, right, from those, most allergenic, triggering foods. And then the antibody's job is to bind to the antigen to render it harmless, which is great in theory, except for if we're continuing to have exposures to these antigens, we don't have a good epithelial barrier in the gut, we don't have a good gut lining to keep bad things out. What happens is these immune complexes, which is what these antigen and antibodies, when they combine together, are called, is now we have an overproduction of these immune complexes, because with this persistent leaky gut, they're just wreaking havoc, and then they themselves act as an antigen of their own making, and they cause chronic inflammation because these immune complexes circulate the body, then are deposited in various tissues and organs. And since the largest organ, quote unquote, right, in your body is skeletal muscle, these immune complexes are deposited there in the joints, the muscles, the synovial membranes, the tendons, and once they're deposited, they cause another local inflammatory response, which at times can actually create your body to attack your own tissues, cells, and organs. This immune complex in these areas sets off an inflammatory response in these joints and muscles, which causes pain, swelling, and stiffness, right? So we have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and all of these, pain syndromes that are plaguing people, and we don't seem to look past, dealing with the symptom as opposed to going to the root of the problem, which is these immune complexes, and why are they being triggered, and how can we keep them from entering these tissues. Really interesting research on osteoarthritis, which is an incredibly complex disease. It's both genetic and environmental. And one idea of this environmental factor that's puts people at risk for getting osteoarthritis is the pathogenesis of gastrointestinal microbiome imbalance. So because obesity is known to affect gastrointestinal microbiome and vice versa, right? The mechanism is that potentially through this low-grade systemic inflammation, which is mediated by bacterial endotoxins, I should have explained to you. So endotoxins are bacteria that get in the bloodstream. They're bacteria that are not where they're supposed to be. It's not necessarily bad bacteria, but they become toxic because they migrate from the gut into the circulation, which is not where they should be. So these bacterial endotoxins actually are part of this mechanism which predisposes people to this osteoarthritis, this low grade developed from this low grade systemic inflammation. So I didn't leave myself a ton of time to talk about autoimmune concerns, but it's definitely a passion of mine, as the majority of my clients that come to me either have or have a close family member that has an autoimmune disease, which makes sense because with 1 in 9 women or 1 in 12 Americans developing an autoimmune disorder in their lifetime and approximately 50 million Americans who suffer currently from autoimmune diseases, it's definitely a relevant topic. Um, Trying to understand the pathogenesis of autoimmunity is daunting, and yet it's simple in many ways. It kind of blows my mind that this is not taught widely, that there are three main foundational triggers for developing an autoimmune disease, and all three of them need to be in place for actually the illness or the chronic disorder to be triggered. I keep saying trigger because I'm looking at the word trigger. And so let's talk a little bit about that because understanding this is going to be really liberating, I think, for people. So when we look at an autoimmune disease, there is a genetic predisposition, right? And that doesn't mean that, if you tested your genome and you're predisposed to be more at risk to develop breast cancer or Alzheimer's or something like that, that I really want people to understand you are not your mutation, right? That does not mean that this is your destiny. There's something called epigenetics, and this is the turning on and off of the genetic switches. And even once those switches have been turned on, there is ways to modulate the immune system as well as support through food and lifestyle, through stress management to downregulate those switches so that they don't contribute to your health concerns. And then the other one is the trigger, my favorite word for this slide apparently. And that can be a stressful event and an illness, kind of the last straw. Was it a big event? Was it a car accident, a death of a loved one? What was the big trigger? Was it an infidelity of a spouse? Or, um, man, that got dark really fast. But there's usually a trigger, and it doesn't always have to be something massive. It can kind of be like the last straw, so something that, had been accumulating for a long time that pushed the body over the edge into this autoimmune response where the immune system just goes haywire and doesn't appropriately act anymore because it's just kind of burnt out. We just frazzled the heck out of it. And then the third one, which you've already read, but is just mind-boggling to me, is that there has to be a leaky gut. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have gut symptoms, because I have a lot of autoimmune clients that don't necessarily display symptoms of gut dysbiosis or imbalance. That doesn't mean that there isn't any, right, underneath the surface that's adding to this low-grade inflammation that's kind of tipping the scale of this inflammatory response. Something that's really encouraging to me is that you can actually arrest the progression of an autoimmune disease by healing the gut. Um, and that's largely because having to do with this inflammatory autoimmune response, right? So the body sends these bullets, as in inflammatory cytokines, from the immune system to attack. And when there's an autoimmune component, this process is happening too much. It's happening at the wrong, we've got the gun fired at the wrong people. It's friend or foe situation here. And because these inflammatory cytokines or bullets don't really distinguish between good and bad, there's so much collateral damage in the process. Estrogen, thyroid, hormones, cell receptors, all of these things are getting damaged by this inflammatory process. And these inflammatory cytokines can actually like punch holes in the gut. So even if you address the inflammation but don't deal with the gut healing, or if you do the gut healing but you don't address the inflammation, you're not going to get at the root cause and you're not going to really be able to fully heal. So I've talked to you guys a lot about fermented foods, which is, obviously the preference, especially if you've laid a foundation of gut healing. Fermented foods can shift the balance for so many people, and they've been shown to alter epigenetic switches, which for people with autoimmune conditions is going to be significantly important in arresting and, healing from the chronic disease state, or especially in a flare or something like that. This is one of those products that I'm not much of a product pusher and I don't try to make money off of supplements, but that I have seen amazing results with. And this is a type of probiotic that has kind of like a little turtle shell around it. So it survives the upper GI and all of the bile salts and the stomach acid and the enzymes to make it to the gut to colonize. And there's been some really interesting research on it about its effect on the reduction of inflammation and pain. All of these things that we've been talking about, right? How the microbiome, especially when it's dysbiotic, is adding to the problem, and how potentially the dysbiosis was a trigger for the problem. And so we can actually reduce a lot of those symptoms by healing the gut, improving, um, the epithelial barrier, and assisting in all of these um, processes that should be happening in the body so that we can, restore balance. This is one of those things that you can't just go to the grocery store and buy because it is a true medical intervention. It will, if you haven't laid a good foundation, it will kind of kick you on your butt because it's going to do some pretty dramatic remodeling of the gut microbiome. But it is something that you can find with practitioners potentially in your area if you're not around me, by looking at their website. And I really do see it as a valuable addition to a health regimen. So here's some other ways that we can turn things around, right? Heal from this pain, inflammation, and autoimmunity conundrum, the evil trifecta, right? So keeping hydrated is going to be incredibly crucial. The idea is to drink half your body weight in ounces, up to 100 ounces. So if you're over 200 pounds, if you're going to max out at 100 ounces is what we're shooting for. And that can be daunting, but I kid you not, it is going to make a massive impact on the health of your body, your inflammatory responses, and your pain signaling symptoms. Um, Getting sleep, practicing mindfulness. You can actually change the way your body processes cortisol and stress hormones and all those things by being mindful and practicing meditation, especially around the times that you're eating or in times of stress. Eating anti-inflammatory foods or ant-inflammatory foods. Inflammatory foods for ants. Nice. Great typo. So fats, especially these fatty fish such as salmon, chia and flax seeds, huge anti-inflammatory benefits. Coconut oil and walnuts have all been studied as these fats that help restore this balance of omega-3 to omega-6, right? We want the higher omega-3s to reduce the inflammation, these inflammatory sixes. Then for fruits, we're looking for color and vibrancy. Berries have an amazing antioxidant, anti-inflammatory property, as well as pineapple. And of course, our green leafies, especially broccoli and bok choy, known for their anti-inflammatory. Herbs and spices, I have an entire class on this that I teach regularly about how you can increase your health and nutrition by just adding things in. It's not always about taking away, a lot of times it's about adding in, and the amazing benefit you can find from adding in some fresh herbs and spices and seasonings to your food. You've got to address the gut. You've got to heal that leaky gut. Some ways to do that are to increase bone broth into your diet, aloe, deglycerated licorice root, glutamine and zinc, like we talked about earlier, that will help bind together those tight junctions. Making sure that those are from quality sources is also going to be critical. Zinc oxide is not going to help you heal your gut. Processed sugars, let's take away the triggers, right? So if we figure out the underlying triggers, whether it's food sensitivities, underlying viral or bacterial infections, and then we eliminate the sugar, the processed sugar, we're going to be giving the body a break to balance the microbiome. Taking gluten and dairy out for a period of time can often be therapeutically benefit from people that have chronic inflammation and pain, because it just gives the GI system a break. It reduces kind of those highly inflammatory foods. Not that they don't have a place. Well, I'm not going to go there, but yeah, so that for a period of time can be beneficial for the body. Extra support, turmeric. So there's a lot of great, information about turmeric out there, and people are just going to the store en masse and buying it, but not necessarily noticing a significant benefit. And that is because there has to be an active number of curcumoids. You need to get a rhizome extract. It needs to say how many active properties, what's happening in the supplement. So look for a quality company. You need something that's bioavailable. Often it'll have black pepper with it to help unlock the turmeric. You're looking for curcumoid activity in it. And the difference is phenomenal. You can take a bottle of the store-bought turmeric as opposed to something like Inflamma Complete, um, and the difference in how your body responds is significant. Golden milk is another great way to get turmeric in, and to reduce inflammation and in the body. Dark cherry juice, Epsom salt baths, using things like arnica creams to reduce inflammation without hijacking metabolic processes by taking more medications. Chamomile tea. Chamomile, the real kind, not the kind you buy at the store that's just the chopped up leaves, but the actual chamomile with the bud can actually smooth the gut, especially if we have gallbladder issues or anything like that. It just smooths and helps reduce inflammation in the gut lining. And it's night and day what you're going to buy from an actual tea shop of the buds as opposed to like the smushed up leaves from the grocery store. Essential oils, heat and cold therapy, so sauna or cryo, or just at home doing hot and cold therapy, especially if we're looking at autoimmune, thyroiditis or something like that, can be massively beneficial. And then last but not least, let's really be careful of what we put in our body. That has been shown over and over in research studies, dozens and hundreds and thousands probably of times, is these sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, and different additives that really destroy the microbiome and have been shown to cause an inflammatory response. So hopefully this will get you started on turning things around or give you some information on what to do for pain, inflammation, and autoimmunity as relates to microbiome health. Have a great evening.